Greetings and welcome. I am Dr. Lori Wieters, and I am both friend and mentor to World Beyond Borders. We are a nonprofit program who strive to break down any kind of barriers that may exist between us. Through our programming, we invite individuals who have had significant accomplishments in life to come and share their stories with us. These stories are shared in hopes to create encouragement for those who are on similar life paths. Through this programming, we also want to ensure that we honor and respect the traditions of the past. We want to celebrate the present, and we want to set a solid foundation for those individuals who are coming behind us. Welcome to World Beyond Borders.
Welcome all. Today we are very happy and excited to introduce you to our guest, Dr. Ramina Jajoo. She is practicing physician here in United States and she was born in Tehran, Iran. Dr. Jajoo, we welcome you here. Thank you for coming here. Tell us about your background and how did you come here and what you have accomplished.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Tucker, for having me. I'm very glad to be here. Thank you. My name is Ramina Jajoo Friendrich. I am from Iran, Tehran. I was born in Tehran, which is the capital city of Iran. My ethnicity is Assyrian, and a lot of people are not familiar with that. Assyrians are different to Syrians, but they are the indigenous people of the Middle East, which covers Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. And I lived in Tehran for about 16 years. Life became very difficult after the Islamic Revolution in 1979. So my family and most of my friends decided that they're going to leave Tehran because of the religious oppression against the religious minorities and also because of our ethnicity. So we left in 1984 and we went to Sydney, Australia. So in Iran, life was difficult, especially for women. I'm sure we're noticing that
Yes.
lately. For instance, as a child, when the revolution happened, as a child, I was told that I had to cover my hair, I had to wear loose, baggy clothes, I had to be careful with what I said, where I went. My parents were really scared, so they would keep us indoors. Food became really scarce, and we had to study certain religious subjects that were not in keeping with our own beliefs. Our churches were closed down, so we had to leave. So that was one of the few things that I remember about Iran. And then when we arrived in Sydney in Australia, life was so different. Everything was different. I remember specifically when we took the cab home to our destination, and there's this big truck with a truck driver in it with a big cowboy hat, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm in a Western movie. I'm in Hollywood. That was my first impression of Australia. But we had friends there, we had relatives who sponsored us, so we ended up staying in Sydney. But we couldn't speak English. My dad was the only one who could speak English, so we had to learn English from scratch within 3 months. And dictionary became my best friend, my favorite book. Every single word had to be looked up, right? And some of the names that we were called by other kids, other students, there were slangs. There were Australian slangs. Some of them were derogatory. We're talking in the 1980s. People were not very politically correct back then. So even if I tried to look them up in dictionary, they weren't there. So I had to ask friends and family members, what is this? So it was very stressful. We had to learn the language very quickly. The one thing that was really interesting about Sydney was that kids were encouraged to ask questions. Whereas back in Iran, it was completely different. We couldn't ask questions. We couldn't challenge authority, our teachers, even our parents to some degree. Although I feel that my family were very liberal in some sense, and my dad would always say, we're diplomatic in this household. You can ask me anything you want. But in Australia, it was to a different extent. So it was something that I had to learn to not be shy and kind of talk to people, ask questions, and not be afraid. So that's what happened in Sydney. And I remember when I was trying to be, they were looking at placing me in high school, and they had to decide which grade to put me in, first of all, and then which subjects, because there are like, different levels of math. So I remember one of my high school teachers, he specifically said, his name was Mr. Smith, he said, Ramina, how's your math? Because I hear people from Middle East are very good at math. I said, my math is good. He said, okay, I'll give you a little test. We'll see how you do. So I failed the test miserably. And he came up to me and he said, what are you talking about? You said you were good at math. I said, I was. He said, how come you didn't even finish it? I said, it was too long. He said, well, I just wanted to know if there was something wrong with your calculator. I said, I had to use a calculator?
Wow.
So he said, yes, how could you try and do this without a calculator? So anyway, long story short,
wow.
he placed me in the top class in math, and English was still a challenge. And when I did the high school certificate, I actually scored perfect in the highest level of math. So he was very proud of me. But eventually, I just applied to universities and got into medical school.
Wow, that's so inspiring, Dr. Ramina. I can't imagine a girl from Tehran, Iran, from there to a big, like a very famous name in medicine in United States. This journey is very, very inspiring. And if you can share like a few of your challenges in the medical career when you were trying to get there and fit into the new culture, it'll be great.
Sure. Yeah, so I made it to medical school. I went to University of New South Wales, despite my parents actually discouraging me, especially my mother. She didn't want me to go to medical school, which is very unusual for the Middle Eastern people, right? We have to either study medicine, law, or engineer. Right?
Yeah.
Yes. But she didn't want me to do that. She thought it was too long, 6 years. And I graduated when I was 24. But the challenge during medical school was, again, language. And again, not being afraid to ask questions, approach my professors. And then the mix of students was really interesting. I remember that in my close circle of friends, a lot of kids came from Egypt, Greece, China, India, a lot of people from India, even Yugoslavia. We had... it was really a multicultural society. And for me to adjust to their culture was a little strange. In Iran, we were very homogenous. You kind of commingled with the Assyrians or, some Persians as well, of course, but that was it. But in Sydney, it was like, oh my God, the Greeks celebrate Easter in a different way, and the Egyptians do it differently, and then the Chinese have their own traditions, the Indians have their own traditions. It was really, really interesting, but I had to be a little bit careful with what I said, things, and how I said them, so that was one of the challenges. And of course, medical school back then was a little different too. Like, we had really brutal work hours. I had to commute because I didn't have a car, so I had to take public transport. I had to walk to the train station, catch a train, and then a bus, and then walk to my university. So each day I would travel 1.5 hours each way. So 3 hours a day was spent in commute.
Wow.
Yeah, so those were some of the challenges in medical school.
And thinking of being a doctor at that time in 80s is like a big decision, because most of the women, they will try to be maybe teacher or something. What influenced you to become a doctor? Was there any reason from the family, or what inspired you to be a doctor?
Good question. Like I said, my mother didn't want me to become a doctor. My dad was impartial. He left it up to me. Simply, it was a process of elimination. I was not good at humanities. My English wasn't very good, so I couldn't go into law, and I wasn't even interested. So I was somewhat good at, math, science, and I thought, you know what, I'll just give it a go. So it was a process of elimination. I didn't want to be an accountant or an engineer because, you know, being an accountant, you have to deal with numbers all day behind a desk. An engineer, well, you have to be good at physics, I suppose, and I wasn't very good at physics, so it was just process of elimination.
Great.
Yeah.
And being a girl into medicine, do you think that journey is difficult than being a man into medicine?
I'm not sure. Especially these days. I think there are more women than men going into medicine. I'm not quite certain.
And that back then it was
Back then, even then, we had really good mix of both men and women. So my class was over 200 students.
Good.
So I would say there were about 50-50.
50-50.
Yeah.
Because I've heard from some people that being a girl into medicine is also challenging because it's like mainly men out there, but having that 50-50 is really good.
Yes.
Yeah. And what is the definition of success to you? Like, how do you see success?
I thought about that question, and I've been asked that question before. I think success to different people means different things, and even at different stages of your life, it means different things, right? To a teenager, success means how many friends you have, how many birthday parties you get invited to. When I was in medical school, I would say, if you ask me that question, I would say if I got the perfect score and I became the valedictorian, right?
That's success.
In my 30s, I would say, if I was making the most money out of my career. Nowadays, I'd like to think that if I can differentiate between what I have control over and what I don't, and kind of focus my time and energy onto things that I have control over, I can become much more productive. And the more productive I am, the more successful I see myself.
Wow, that's so great. And I see, like, I have read about you that you have contributing to society. You have been working for Assyrian kids to develop their language. How do you do this time management? It's not easy.
It's gotten easier, Ms. Thakur. It's because I retired from my practice in 2019. But up until then, I was also teaching and volunteering at our church in Glendale. It's called St. Peter Assyrian Church of the East. And I would take my son with me, so he would learn the Assyrian language, he would learn the Christian belief. And then I was there for 11 years. And it was tough because Glendale was far from me. Yeah. But it was so enriching. I really learned to know my people, know their struggles. Most of them are coming from other countries, from other cultures. Most of us think that Assyrians from Middle East, that we're all homogenous, that we're not, but we're not. We're very different in some ways. We might speak the same language, but we have different dialects, as I'm sure you understand. It's the same in India, right? We've grown under different types of governments that kind of influences how we behave. So I really learned a lot about that. Time management was difficult, I must say, and I did stop from being the director of the school after 6 years. I stopped in 2017. But the school is still there, and I still see people, and all the kids that were in the school, now they're in college at ASU, so it's lovely to see them succeed in their own ways.
That's marvelous. Being a director in a school and being a doctor, being a mom and being a successful entrepreneur, everything is really very great. And what I would like to know from you is, what's your guidance for your younger self, like for our young generations? Who are trying to basically settle into this new environment?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I would tell myself, my younger self, A, don't be afraid. And B, you're going to exceed all of your expectations. So just keep your mind open.
So I understand that you are a president of a non-profit organization. Can you tell our audience more about that?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm the president of the SAFO Center, which is also known as the Assyrian Genocide Research Center, Arizona chapter. I'm only the president of the Arizona chapter. Seifu Center was started by a gentleman by the name Sabri Atman in Europe several years ago. I want to say in 2003, but he opened a chapter in US in 2011, and then we became more kind of consolidated in Arizona since 2018, I want to say. Right now I serve as the president, and our mission is to serve and educate and advocate for our community. Particularly, we want to raise awareness about the various genocides that happen against the Assyrian people. They are the minorities. They are being persecuted in the Middle East. The most recent example was the ISIS invasion in Iraq and Syria, and they internally displaced and drove out over 1 million Assyrians out of the Middle East. We publish books, we sponsor speakers, we bring speakers to Arizona State University to their program called Genocide Awareness Week, which will be this year from April 17th to April 20th, so a 4-day program, and they bring scholars from all over the world to talk about different types of genocides, again, different people. We're one of the sponsors. There are other organizations that also sponsor this event. This year we will have Dr. Sargon Donabed, who's a very well-known, famous Assyrian scholar, and we'll also have an opera singer, Miss Leah Fisher, who will be performing.
Perfect. Thank you so much, and it's really great. It's like being a voice of minority and helping them. And I really appreciate your efforts in building community and helping society. Thank you so much for making it here and talking to our audience. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Thanks. It's beautiful setup here. I really appreciate this.
Thank you.